Our next guest, one of the most influential economists out there, in his latest post on Substack actually says that, well, voodoo trade policy has come to America, and, well, it could have a damaging effect. Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate in economics and distinguished professor of economics at the City University of New York, joins us right now. And, Professor, I do want to start off here as to the effects of these tariffs. The tariffs are already here, and if you believe Trump at his words, they're probably going to increase or at least broaden out to other countries. The damage is to who? Our economy or Mexico, Canada, China, et cetera?
All of the above. I mean, you're basically throwing sand in the gears of international commerce and manufacturing, and particularly Canada and Mexico. You know, there is no U.S. manufacturing sector. There's a North American manufacturing sector. It's very, very tightly integrated. Parts, components go back and forth across those borders. Suddenly you're going to put 25% tariffs on all of this, and that's really, really destructive. I mean, these are business relationships that have been built up over 30 years. And now you're suddenly making them much more difficult. And it doesn't stop there. At some point, you know, I've been seeing some people saying, okay, Canada and Mexico, as if that won't lead to tariffs on other countries. But, you know, the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing vis-a-vis Japan and Europe would be very gravely hurt by those tariffs. So almost certainly, if Trump goes ahead and does what he says he wants to do, then the tariffs will have to be extended to pretty much the whole world.
I am curious. I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you, obviously, your Nobel Prize, of course, focused on trade, the research that you did back in the 70s and 80s. And I am curious about kind of this idea of what sort of modern trade policy can be. I mean, your research basically kind of overturned everything I think we thought about, at least that a lot of us were taught in the early days about trade and sort of what facilitates trade and the needs of each country and what they need. What's changed now in 2025 in this new era that sort of makes maybe past policies maybe obsolete?
It's actually really hard to say that much has changed. I mean, what we did learn, lesson of the 2000s, the first decade of this century, was that rapid growth of imports, the China shock, is more disruptive than we realized. Not that the basic economics was wrong, but we had failed to take full account of just what it does to localized manufacturing centers that find themselves in the path of this kind of wave. But and that's why China's trade surplus continues to be a problem. But nothing that I've written, nothing that is in new trade theory or new trade theory, whatever you want to call it, says that it makes any sense to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico. I mean, this is not coming from a changed world. This is just coming from the personal obsession of Donald Trump.
Professor, in what kind of scenarios would an America First policy, though, be justified? To reshore manufacturing, for example, to diversify supply chains. In what idea does that actually make sense?
I mean, there's no question. National security issues. There's always been a clause, both in international trade agreements and in our own law, that allows you to use tariffs or other means to protect crucial areas for national security. But that has to be focused. It has to be strategic. And particularly if you're thinking, look, we've learned from Ukraine, we've learned that the age of great power conflict is not over, but we're not going to have a war with Canada. We're not going to have a war with Mexico. And they are, in fact, effectively, they are part of our industrial base. So by disrupting those relationships, you actually reduce U.S. economic security. You impair U.S. manufacturing capacity compared with that of China.
Right.
So that doesn't make any sense on those grounds.
I mean, Professor, maybe not for Canada, but for Mexico in terms of the fentanyl crisis. I mean, in some ways, does that make sense to you?
Well, there is a problem there, although the migrant crisis, by the way, has, the number of cross-border crossings has dropped a lot. And fentanyl is a real issue, but there's lots of ways. The Mexicans have lots of reasons to try to help the United States control this, although they will say, the problem is your demand for drugs is very hard for us to overcome. But, I think it's useful in understanding all this that Trump is lumping Canada in with Mexico. And let me tell you, there is no crisis of mass numbers of people crossing the Canadian border. There's not a surge of Canadian drugs entering America, except for people trying to get lower prices on prescription drugs. So this is I think this is basically a blind. This can't be the real motivation for this policy, because it just doesn't make sense. Yeah. Especially, I think by going after Canada, Trump has in a way showed his hand, and this is not about what he says it's about.
Yeah, I mean the Canada thing. I don't know what's going on there, Paul. I mean that's I don't know. That's all, we can do a whole show on that. I do though think more broadly about this idea of protectionism, and I do wonder if in your research and over these decades, did you ever really find a meaningful case for protectionist policies like this? Meaning, is there a scenario where they can work?
Well, look, there are scenarios, and in fact, I and others did a lot on scenarios in which a highly sophisticated more subsidies rather than tariffs, but a highly sophisticated policy of subsidizing strategic industries can work. And in fact, by the way, the Biden administration was doing quite a lot of that. The CHIPS Act and all of that was, in fact, a nationalist industrial policy, but a narrowly targeted one. And the problem with all of these things is that it is very, very hard to be sure what you're doing. It's so easy to end up, you're supposed to be facilitating national security. You're supposed to be promoting technology. And what you end up is just delivering a lot of favors to special interest groups. And that's not a reason never to do it, but it's a reason to be highly suspicious when somebody seems to be all in on protectionism on flimsy reasons.
Does protectionism, though, particularly in a world that maybe is a little bit more fractured and maybe not as global in nature as we kind of saw in that post-World War II economy, and we kind of know that there's a certain element of this Trump administration that would like to see that post-World War II order completely decimated. But does it matter as much? Because I ask that because the tariffs never went away on China. Biden came in, he basically kept them in place. The U.S. economy did fine. The Chinese economy obviously has had issues, but not necessarily related to export and tariffs. And they found other ways, other countries, other partners to export goods to, just like we found other places to buy and source our resources.
Yeah, but you need to bear in mind that Trump 1.0 tariffs were basically an order of magnitude smaller in the picture than Trump 2.0 threatens to be. The major tariffs were, roughly 20% tariff on goods from China, which is only a small fraction in the end. It seems bigger, but they're actually only a small fraction of our total imports. Now we're talking about 25% tariffs sort of across the board, and Trump throws out various numbers, but sometimes he's talked about 60% on China. So what happened from the Trump 1 trade policy is a very poor guide. And if you ask me, why didn't the Biden administration take them off? Well, it was pure politics. Nobody wanted to be accused of being soft on China. I think they were pretty well aware that, not that we don't have real conflicts with China, and we took some pretty tough measures on things like advanced semiconductor. Yeah. But it's just, this was a problem they didn't need. And since the costs of that relatively limited trade war were fairly low, they decided, let's leave it alone.
Professor, we really, really appreciate your time. We will also get you back as all of this continues to unfold. Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate in economics and distinguished professor of economics at the City University of New York.